Hello, everybody, and welcome to the December 5th, 2018 edition of the Ephrom Josine Show. I'm your host, Ephrom Josine, and some people are wondering why I haven't been covering the George H.W. Bush funeral. The answer is, I don't feel like I can without sounding like a bad person. I do not like George H.W. Bush. I think his father worked with Adolf Hitler and his son tried to turn us into Nazi Germany. Not only that, but I also think that he overall was very harmful to the country as CIA director and with who he was vice president for, as well as his presidential policies, which were very similar to Reagan's. Basically, I don't feel like I could without sounding kind of bad, so I just decided to not bother. Anyway, I don't think I've made this clear enough yet, by the way, in the 135 episodes of the show, so I'm just going to say it right here and now. Good God, I hate the pro-life movement. Now, this is not to talk about every individual who identifies as pro-life. I know several who are perfectly fine people. In fact, if you're just personally opposed to it, I understand personally. However, the movement as a whole, people like, well, off the top of my head, give me Mitch McConnell or Leah Rose, and news sites like Live Action and LifeSite, just to have a tendency to be literally the worst sometimes. I've pointed this out before, but Live Action literally reposts its own tweets, sometimes only a few hours apart, just because the people replying to the previous one were being kind of critical to it. I've also pointed out their complete similarities between them and radical vegans several times now. But, Anyway, some of you may recall in episode 121, I covered a story of a group of people with Down syndrome who the pro-life movement were just celebrating, trying to get themselves classified as endangered species. Which, on a side note, if humans aren't on that list, specifically people with Down syndrome are, wouldn't that make them a different species? Anyway, I called this what it is, eugenics. And, I just said what I saw. But then I came across this guy, meet Pixel Protectors, aka Derek. Now, I normally don't do personal things like this on this show. However, Derek has exposed me to a whole new world of glory that I must show you guys. You thought the somewhat professional pro-lifers were bad? Let me introduce you to Twitter pro-lifers. They're just as bad as they sound. I had seen Derek once before because in a previous episode, when I talked about Ohio trying to classify life as beginning at conception and therefore have all fetuses have the same rights as people, also opening the door to making you able to get the death penalty for abortion, Derek went on my Twitter feed and basically spammed nonstop. Can you provide an example of a pro-lifer directly saying that? Which, I guess he thinks the leaders of his movement are stupid then, because no one would ever back a movement that supports the death penalty for abortion openly. That was a different episode, by the way, but 121 I simply titled Pro-Life and Evil Movement. And Derek just gave it a nice little giggle. We're doing eugenics! Isn't that funny? So you know what? I decided to, this was about a week ago, I've spent the last week freshening myself up on pro-life arguments. All of these are from his Twitter, for the record. Not all of them are his, though. Here is one, for instance, he retweeted from Live Action founder Leela Rose. We can't sustain a free society without a virtuous people. Actually, a free society means people have the ability to act in ways you don't consider virtuous. We can't just make laws if we don't recognize the higher moral law. Then why have laws? If there is an objective higher moral law against something like murder, why do we need a law against murder? For instance, and for that matter, if there is a higher objective moral law against abortion, why do you need to keep writing written laws about it? Shouldn't it just be obvious to everyone? We can't protect human rights without acknowledging that those rights come from our Creator. I'd like to introduce you to about half of libertarians. No, rights are simply things that cannot be taken away because they come naturally. As in, you have to infringe upon someone's rights or use force in order to stop them from doing it. That's the basic philosophy of human rights. That has nothing to do with religion. The philosophy of rights has existed long before that. This is one from a dank pro-life memes Twitter account. Pro-choice people arguing for abortion rights, and it shows a girl copying off her friend's test, and the test says, arguments used to support slavery. You know, this just doesn't make any sense to me. I've pointed this out time and time again, but the pro-life movement is no different than the radical vegan movement. Honestly, I'd recommend these people look up the Holocaust on Your Plate campaign. And just remember how hated that was. And then just be happy no one else but me seems to have realized that they're the exact same. Live Action publishes images regularly of Jews in the Holocaust next to the picture of an ultrasound. And just says, yep, these are the exact same thing. This also ignores the fact that Hitler was not pro-choice, because when he both allowed and restricted abortion, it was normally by force. Just before, and he banned abortion for all Aryan women, by the way. Just should be noted. In fact, one of the central tenets of fascism is to have lots of children. That's why Mussolini actually rewarded parents with medals who had, I think, over 14 children. Although I could be off on that. I think we should end this with an article from a group Derek assigns himself to. This video, by the way, was not meant to specifically pick on him. Just, I really don't like the pro-life movement, and he just sort of pushed a button with me. And I saw this article when checking out the website he put in his Twitter bio, and I just couldn't resist. Assisted death and the illusion of control. Let's see what it has to say. I haven't read this one yet. This is another blind reading. Throughout history, the word death has always been followed by a period. Actually, you didn't even follow it with a period in that sentence. But okay. It marks the end of life, and all too often carries with it a sense of finality that is too much to bear. As the old adage goes, tragedy brings out the best and worst in men, and death is the ultimate tragedy. Depends on the death. I mean, like, Osama bin Laden or Adolf Hitler's death really were good things, if anything. I know you're being general, but just kind of bothers me. Through war, the rise and fall of dynasties, and disease, which do not play favorites, mankind has come to death in one of two ways. They have either faced it head-on, or they have turned tail and fled. Until now. Today, men and women are running into the arms of death, looking upon it as a final comforter, a convenience, or even a savior. Ooh, we have a poet in the room! In the form of assisted suicide, euthanasia, and abortion. First off, assisted suicide and euthanasia are literally the same thing. Second off, you can't kill something before it's alive. We've been over this. The death tolls are rising, and the initial shock is diminishing. In 1997, the state of Oregon passed the first law making assisted suicide legal in their death with dignity policy. Over 20 years later, the number of states that make assisted suicide legal has grown. In 7 states! 7! The world is ending. You know how many kids that woman from The Sound of Music had? 7. One was bad enough, but 7. Is that how that line goes? I forget. I haven't seen Sound of Music in a long time. Across Europe, assisted suicide is widespread and viewed as a treatment for illness varying from terminal illness, depressive disorders, prolonged autism, and mental instability. Citation needed for the last few. I do agree, for the record, some of those do cross a line. However, at the end of the day, I believe it should be up to the individual because I believe in freedom personally. Sorry if that bothers you. But death is not healthcare, and it is not treatment. It is an ending. So many political and more debates revolve around the right to choice. Dwelling beneath the surface of the cry of my body or my life is the heart of it all. My choice. Yeah, we don't even deny that. Why do you think it's called the pro-choice movement? Not the pro-body movement or the pro-life movement. Pro-life is you guys. Wait. Pro-life movement. That means that they're the pro-choice movement when you think about it, because life and choice mean the same thing apparently. And therefore, nothing about this makes any sense. It all comes down to the illusion of control. Man longs to be in charge of his own life, even if it can only be in death. But we are not promised the right to death, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Ooh, clever. Oh, how witty. Oh. Did you ever think to you that the right to life also meant the right to not use it anymore? Just as how you have a right to liberty, but if you want to enslave yourself, there is nothing stopping you. Or you have the right to pursue your own happiness, but if you want to be miserable, there is nothing stopping you. Why is it this one thing, the right to life, actually means force? As citizens of this country, we have the right to life. We should have the right to help. Pain should never be overlooked. After all, empathy is the chief characteristic which makes us human. Actually, that's opposable thumbs mostly. And evolutionary pathways. Like, there is empathy within animals, and frontal lobes for that matter. And just forget it. Empathy should drive us to help each other through pain, whether it is physical, mental, or emotional. While it remains controversial, assisted suicide is no longer considered something to be prevented, but rather something to be provided. Which is why the suicide prevention hotline just doesn't exist anymore. You know, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline? The thing that exists to prevent suicides? Which you just said is no longer something to be prevented? In fact, the decision to fight for life is increasingly looked down upon as selfish. It's more virtue signaling than selfish. While those who scrump to the pressure to choose death are hailed as heroic, it is a death culture. I do actually disagree with that, for the record. I do not think it should be treated as heroic. I think it should be treated as another option. Recently, a New York Times article raised the debate about rational suicide, particularly among the elderly suffering from depression. A National Center for Health study revealed that in the year 2018, 1 in 12 American adults are struggling with depression. To then say that suicide is rational for those struggling with depression is a reflection on how twisted our concept of life and death has become. You put no context into that article, for the record, and just sort of shamed them for writing something. But okay. And yet, there is still a way to create a cultural shift, as William L. Wilkes Blackstone, who once penned, "Better to light a candle than to curse the darkness." Our culture of death can be stopped by true life-affirming opinions showing up, implying they aren't already. There are tons of pro-life representatives. Mike Pence is a pro-lifer, and he's vice president. What more do you people want? We've given you opportunity after opportunity to make your point for centuries. And never once has any of your points made any sense. Organizations like Project Semicolon are embodying this hope even in their choice of symbols. They don't actually, by the way, debunk the idea of assisted suicide other than wagging their finger. Just wanted to say that. Anyway, I'm Ephrom, and good night.